Well, I said yesterday that it looked as if the race was going to be between Max and Charles, and so it proved. Although a bit of a surprise today to see Charles Leclerc on the pole. Congratulations to him. Congratulations to everyone at Ferrari, and particularly to Jetcraft, as I mentioned yesterday, is now back working one-on-one with Charles, and I think should take some of the credit for what we saw today with that pole. It wasn't an easy one for Charles because having been dominant over Carlos Sainz yesterday, his teammate, which is of course his yardstick. In Q2, Carlos Sainz really got it together, very, very quick lap. And it was one of those Charles moments. We've seen them before when he had to dig very, very deep and just put it all together in Q3. He was never as quick as Carlos in Sector 1. And I think that possibly is one of the reasons he got the pole, because that enabled him, perhaps, because he hadn't used the tyres quite as much in Sector 1, to have optimum tyres for sectors 2 and 3, where he dominated even over Max Verstappen. So a really good lap by Charles. He was the first to say, of course, qualifying is one thing, racing is another. And I guess, like everybody else, he's thinking of the pace of Max Verstappen yesterday afternoon, 3 o'clock, when it was hot, when he was out on the medium, doing a longer run on the medium tyre than anybody else in the field. And then when the sun went down under lights, he did a similarly long run, and very impressive he was too, on the soft tyre. This year, the regulations have changed. You don't have to run your race tyre in Q2. So everybody was out on soft tyres in Q2. So it'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow at the front of the race, the top 10. I mean, obviously from the back of the grid, you take a gamble, whatever you can do. But at the front, I guess everyone will start on medium. But given the longevity of Max's run on the soft tyre, I suppose that means he'll start on the medium and go to soft at the end of the race, I guess. And this is me just plucking it out of the sky this early in the season with the tyres, as hard as the Pirelli compound range is. So yes, it was Charles Leclerc, really, really good lap, but a very good recovery day for Carlos Sainz, having been off the pace yesterday. I thought it was quite interesting, actually, that he was beaten in the end by Charles, because to me that still highlights the difference in driving. Because regardless of the method you're using, whether you're braking early, braking late, doing this, doing that, it's all about whether or not those inputs are soft and homogeneous or whether they are a little bit spiky. And I've always said that is the difference between Charles and Carlos. And the reason that comes into play, the reason that that's important is when it is Q3 and when it is the last lap and there's literally 2 minutes before the checkered flag and you've got to squeeze a little bit more out of the car. The potential for squeezing that is greater if your inputs are slightly softer and more supple compared with inputs that are slightly more spiky and aggressive. They have a finite limit, whereas the spongy inputs have an infinite limit, if you like. I remember Rob Wilson years ago asked to do a comparison between, he had Kevin Magnussen up there, McLaren asked him to do Kevin Magnussen versus 2 or 3 other drivers. I think it was Stoffel Van Dorn, Nick De Vries, and a couple of others. And at the end of it, Rob said the quickest guy, I think he said it was Stoffel Van Dorn. But the guy with the most potential, because his inputs are so supple and so good, is Kevin Magnussen. He said that a long time ago. And we saw Kevin going very well today, and good job by him. But I think that is what it is all about. It is when it is down to that last 10th of a second in the last minute of qualifying, you've got to dig deep. You're going into the subliminal mode of trying to let everything happen in slow motion. And that's when the softer, supple input driver will always have a little bit more that he can dig into than the spikier driver. And it was interesting to hear Carlos Sainz say, and his head was a bit full of trying to make up that difference to Charles, so perhaps that affected his driving. Well, of course, in reality, when you get in the car, it should all be happening spontaneously and in reaction to what the car is doing. You're balancing all these dynamic weights. And I think the fact that Carlos was saying that shows that he does drive differently. I'm not going to say worse, just differently to Charles. And that's why I've always said Charles is one of these class drivers. And we saw that today. And I thought Sector 2 for Charles Leclerc, I mean, in the absence of Lewis Hamilton having a really good car and enjoying watching Lewis through that brilliant section of 9-10, which I always go on about. It's one of the best sections of road in Formula One, I think. Completely forgotten by the TV cameras and the directors out there, because they don't take into account the importance of that left kink before you're braking into the tight turn 10. And that is where you create the area in which you get the car beautifully stopped, either with basically all four wheels square to the road or with load on the car because you've come through the kink on the edge, and then you've got to brake hard for turn 10. And what Lewis did years ago, first year at McLaren, was to go very, very wide through that kink whilst not compromising his pace through there, but knowing that what happened just after the apex of the kink wasn't that important because he was going to be braking hard anyway. So right on the edge, on the marbles, a very uncomfortable kink, and that's where he was so impressive, going through that kink flat, just wide of the marbles, or on the marbles, just wide of the apex, the centre of the road, right of the centre, and then getting in that nice flat area on which to stop the car. And today it was Charles that was doing that in a beautiful car, the Ferrari, with grip and balance on this new set of soft Pirellis. And through there, that is where, in my opinion, that's where his pole position came from, his brilliance through that 9-10 section. And just fabulous to watch. I didn't get to see Max much through there, I have to say. I'm sure he was excellent. But talking about Max now and where he is, I think if you take into account those long runs that he was doing yesterday on the medium and the soft, longer than anybody else in the grid, that is the setup that he's got for the race. Possibly not getting quite as much from the tyres for a qualifying run, but looking to have a longer stint as a result. A little bit like setting the car up for the wet if it's dry in qualifying, but we know it's going to be wet tomorrow, whatever. Not to that extent, of course, but with the 18-inch wheels, obviously still a lot to be learnt by all the teams as to how these tyres are going to react. But it looks to me as if Red Bull's advantage is going to be in how they can extend the stints, first and second stints in the race tomorrow. So I'll be interested to see how that pans out. And I don't think Max will be too worried about, I mean, he looked like a guy that just had everything in his fingertips. Okay, I lost the pole, wasn't great, but I'm relaxed. I know it's going to be okay. And that's what came through his driving today and the way I think he carried himself after qualifying. So yeah, a really interesting qualifying. Going back to 9 and 10, I think a telling moment. I spoke a lot yesterday about the trouble Mercedes are in. Did they make up any ground overnight? Not really. Let's have a look. At the end of the day, Q1, you've got Lewis doing a 32.2 and Charles 31.4, big gap. Q2, you've got Max doing a 30.7 and Lewis a 31.0, 2 runs, and Max sitting in the pits for his second run. And then in Q3, you've got Charles Leclerc 30.5, Lewis Hamilton, really good lap, 31.2. That would have to be the absolute ultimate you can get from that Mercedes at the moment, bearing in mind George Russell 32.2. So Lewis a second quicker than George Russell around Bahrain. Very impressive for a guy with the amount of road dust on him and the amount of experience and the amount of everything he's got. He's still a second a lap quicker than George Russell. Unbelievable lap. But still 31.2, that's 0.7 slower than a Ferrari around here. And if you want to put it in another way, it's only 0.6 quicker than a Haas. So anyway, going back to turns 9 and 10 and Lewis, I thought the telling moment this morning when there was a moment when Lewis first went out on red tyres, on soft tyres, just to see how the car felt today with the mods they made overnight, to see if it had made the Mercedes any better. And sure enough, there was quite a lot of expectation in the pit lane when Lewis suddenly did a 33.1. And everybody thought, wow, Mercedes are right there. Because at this point, Max Verstappen was basically doing the same times. And when Lewis finished that lap, his engineer got on the radio and said something like, "Oh, Lewis, it's only turn 10 where you've lost a little bit to Max, just overdoing a little bit on the exit there." And I thought to myself, well, that's very early to be saying, comparing him to Max Verstappen within a tenth or two, because Max hasn't really done a lap yet. And sure enough, Max just went away and blew him away a few seconds later. But beyond that, to pick turn 10 as a corner where Lewis was losing to Max was just astonishing to me. Yes, he had a slight bobble coming out of that corner, but that was just getting on the power slightly too soon. It was nothing to do with the way Lewis drives 9-10. And there is nobody better in the world through there, I don't think. Perhaps Charles and probably Max, but right with him. But I don't think better than Lewis through there. So I was absolutely amazed that the engineer said that to Lewis. And anyway, it looked rather silly afterwards because Lewis did that 33.1. Max at the time had done a 33.0, so everyone was excited. And then guess what? Max went up and did a 32.5. So end of conversation about turns 9 and 10. It was everywhere. So yeah, I think that was a little bit of a cameo of where Mercedes are. They're trying to give Lewis lots of, I don't know, what's the word, confidence? Not that he needs confidence, but trying to sort of show him that it's all there, it's going to happen. But there's Lewis Hamilton knowing that this is a really, really difficult car to drive. And they've got some big problems if you're getting rid of the bouncing, the porpoising, and retaining the downforce level, that's going to be the issue. And of course, in getting rid of some of the bouncing and the porpoising, which they've got to do, that's the number one priority, they're losing downforce and grip. So just as a reminder from yesterday, which is the only time that we saw Mercedes and Ferrari and Red Bull all out on medium tyres, admittedly the heat of the afternoon, Max 34.7, Charles Leclerc 36.1, that's why Max is feeling reasonably confident, Lewis Hamilton 36.3. So, it won't be, the gap won't be that big, obviously, but I think Max has quite a lot with which to play, and we're going to see that tomorrow in the race. But good luck to Charles and Ferrari. I'm really pleased for the whole Ferrari team and the amount of flack they've been getting over the last few years. And it looks like they've done a really good job with the power unit as well. In the architecture they've had to build into the power unit to get the car the shape it is. They seem to have done a really good job, and they did a good job back end of last year with the electric side of the engine. So that's really good. Let's look at some of the other results. Sergio Perez, P4, 30.9 to Max's 30.6. What can you say? As for Lewis's lap, 31.2 P5. He did a 31.0 in Q2, and George Russell also did a 31.2 as well, both really quick in Q2. But because they were using the softs there, when I guess normally they might have been running the medium, not that with the car going this way they would have done that necessarily this weekend, they didn't really have enough tyres going into Q3, so they had to really ration the way they were using them, and that's why George was a second off the pace in Q3, and Lewis didn't get the best from the car in Q3. So it never rains, but it pours, I guess you got to say, from a Mercedes point of view. The other interesting stat, and although I watch top speeds quite a lot on the straight, quite a lot of people say, yeah, but it's all dependent on wing level, it doesn't mean that much. Well, it's a pretty chronic situation at Mercedes where it looks as if this car is not massively quick in a straight line. It seems to be carrying a lot of drag. It seems to be okay around the circuit. But the jury is out at the moment as to whether or not the Mercedes power unit is as quick, and I never thought we'd be saying this, as the Ferrari or the Renault or, of course, the Red Bull Honda. So that's another issue for Mercedes. The engines are homologated now, and I guess the attitude's going to be, there's not a lot we can do about it, we just need to get on. All this to the backdrop of all the results coming out from the Abu Dhabi inquest, if that's the right word, announced today by the FIA. I made a few notes because, I mean, if you read the results of all the discussions they've been having about Abu Dhabi, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but if you read them all, basically, they're saying, oh, well, yeah, no mistakes were made at all. There was some grey area in the regulations about whether the safety car came in too early or not. And otherwise, we're going to fix everything and make sure that all the cars are able to unlap themselves in the future. And of course, the FIA, Formula One, and the teams and the drivers all want the race to finish under a green flag. Well, that's news to me. Nobody consulted me about that. I don't necessarily think it's great to finish a race under a green flag, to have a one-lap sprint. As I've said before, if that Abu Dhabi Grand Prix had finished behind the safety car and Lewis Hamilton, having driven the race of his life, was about then to win his 8th World Championship, beating Michael Schumacher's record, and was cruising around on that last lap, you don't think that even the most mediocre of TV commentators couldn't have found emotion and really sent that moment around the world? That would have been absolutely captivating television, I think. You would have had Lewis waving to the crowd, you could have put the music in there, the whole thing. This obsession, this childlike obsession, we've got to finish with a sprint. I mean, it's like they're trying to play computer games all the time. I'm sorry, I'm getting a bit wound up about that, but I think the main reason they're saying that everything is okay and no results will change and everything's normal is purely because everybody thinks it's a great idea to finish the race under the green flag. And that's where there was some confusion. So if you read all this, bottom line, Michael Massey did nothing wrong at all. So why is he being relieved of his job? I don't get it. If you read the results of this report. So, having thought about it, yeah, Michael made a massive mistake, and I think he made the mistake at the worst possible time of the year, the worst possible time of his career. But nonetheless, if you read this, didn't make a mistake at all. It's just a bit of grey area about one of the regs, and that's it. Anyway, so yeah, Lewis. One thing I've forgotten to say, I know this is a bit all over the place, one thing I've forgotten to say is how good Lewis looks in the car now with all that green on the helmet, the green number, the full green 44 number. He's now got the green roll hoop as well, camera. And the whole thing just looks really Henri Pescarolo, doesn't it? It's really good. Green, yeah, love green. Valtteri Bottas, who was the quickest of the non-megastars? Valtteri Bottas. I mean, there's a lot of talk, and correctly so, around Kevin Magnussen and the job he's doing for Haas, and indeed the job Haas are doing in general, because Mick Schumacher's been right up there as well. Get on the mistake. But Valtteri Bottas had to sit out the first run of Q3. He made through Q3, Alfa Romeo Q3, really quick. Had to sit out the first one to save some tyres, and went out and P6. I mean, yeah, he's had some dodgy moments in the past at Mercedes, hasn't he? Particularly that race at Abu Dhabi. But this P6 for Valtteri in the Alfa, 31.5, brilliant. Kevin Magnussen, 7th in the Haas. Quite a lot of friends during the day have been WhatsApping saying, why is the Haas so quick? Well, who knows, really? I mean, if everybody knew why they were quick, it's more difficult to know why you're quick than why you're slow. But this is my theory, and obviously it's some cynicism here, but given the new regulations on what you can do with the wind tunnel and how limited it is, and Ferrari did finish 3rd in the Constructors' Championship last year, we shouldn't forget that. So wind tunnel testing time and data and CFD is at a premium. So I think Ferrari have done a very good job and sensibly have allowed Haas to set up a drawing office in Maranello now. And I think probably there's quite a lot of wind tunnel data now that Haas are using that may find its way to Ferrari. And yeah, not the only team out there to be doing such a thing. So Haas benefiting from all of that. And at the same time, we shouldn't forget that it's built by Dallara. And what are Dallara good at doing? Building very big, strong racing cars. And given the amount of downforce that's around now, and given the obvious flexing of the floor on the Mercedes, that's why they put the stays on the car. They've allowed the new regulations have been written to allow stays for the floor, flexing going on. At Mercedes right now, you can be sure there's nothing but beefing up going on. Well, at Haas, I suspect it's already beefed up because it's a Dallara, it's a big, strong car. And there's another interesting point here. It's a bit more of a philosophical point, but Haas is a team where there aren't many spares there. It's too early in the season. They've just got the cars built in time. They've had all these dramas going into the race. They're a lean, mean team. And so therefore they don't make many changes to the cars. They got a great racing driver in Kevin Magnussen. They just get on with it, and Mick Schumacher doing a very good job as well, and just getting on with the racing. The flip side to that, you could say, might be Aston Martin. More and more money going into the team, more and more people, good people it seems, but the team is going backwards. That's an interesting point, isn't it? So it's a philosophical point, and it looks, Haas at the moment look a little bit like Racing Point just after they've been taken over, or indeed Force India looked when they were lean, mean and hungry and didn't have a lot of spares and couldn't make a lot of changes to the cars and just had to go motor racing with what they had. That's what Haas are doing. And of course, Aston Martin are now spoilt for choice. So that's the interesting philosophical point. But going back to Haas, I think we're seeing quite a lot of Ferrari in there. And I think we're seeing the strength, literal physical strength of a Dallara chassis, which was built to last, as distinct from, say, the Mercedes, which for sure has a lot of downforce, but it's flexing, and they're going to need to beef it up. And as they beef it up, it'll put on weight. So excellent. I'm so pleased for them. Pleased for Gene Haas as well, and everything he's done. Pleased for Kevin Magnussen to be coming out, whatever he was doing, watching TV on the sofa, and now coming back and being mega quick. Fernando Alonso, too, really good job. He had to ration his tyres and his running as well in both Q2 and Q3. And 32.1, P8. Can't be unhappy with that, Fernando. Very, very good job. And Pierre Gasly got it into top 10. So very good job from him as well in what is obviously quite a difficult AlphaTauri.